Alright, what's up guys, got another video of what if Luke Skywalker trained Anakin Skywalker. So I see in the comments people be recommending ideas, but I thought about having a cash app that people could donate an idea for a video they might want to see, and it could be a lore, comic, me wanting to talk about a show or a specific movie or moments or my thoughts on them, or a what if / fanfic idea. And if I can, I would try to turn them into a short, if I could, a full-fledged video if I'm like, okay, this idea good as fuck. So the cash app will be linked down below from now on if you want to donate or anything, but you don't have to of course, but it's up to you. But anyways, if you like this type of content, then be sure to subscribe for more what if / fanfics, lore, comic reviews, and video essays, just all things Star Wars. But with all that out of the way, why don't we just dive right on in. So the story starts out after the events of Return of the Jedi, The Mandalorian, Ahsoka, and all of that. Luke was 35 years old and was at the start of beginning his new Jedi Order. Ahsoka was off doing her own thing, as was Grogu, but with Leia giving birth to her son Ben, he began looking towards the next generation of Force users and what the Jedi would become. Luke had traveled to Dagobah to enter the dark side cave where he often found himself meditating. His thoughts flowed from the future of the galaxy and the Jedi to the past, and the tragedies that occurred to result in the present day. And at the helm of those tragedies was his father, Anakin Skywalker. His father was born a slave, but after becoming a Jedi, he lost his mother, and then he lost his wife, which caused his downfall into becoming Vader. The current state of the galaxy was getting better, but Luke pondered the idea that maybe it could be better. Luke wondered if the past could be changed, to create a better future for the galaxy and everyone living in it. He meditated on this idea until he opened his eyes, and saw he was in a strange place. He found himself on a mythical bridge and looked all around to see various doorways and pathways. He realized where he was at. Ahsoka had spoken to him of her experience. He was in the world between worlds. Luke looked around and it was almost mystical. It had an ethereal feeling to it that he couldn't describe. Ahsoka had spoken for her encounter with the Clone Wars version of Anakin, and he wondered if something similar would happen. But at the same time, he also wondered why he was here. Was it for some grand purpose to bring back the Jedi? He was technically already attempting to do that, or could it possibly be for another purpose? But Luke's thoughts trailed back to his father, and Luke sat down and began to meditate. Here he felt the connection to the Force like he had never felt before, but he also felt something else. He felt his father, or at least another version of his father, one that was much younger and hadn't been tainted by the dark side. As Luke meditated, he saw his father's life, and the events that unfolded. His life as a slave, being brought to the temple and becoming a Jedi, becoming Obi-Wan's Padawan, the start of the Clone Wars, and his marriage to Padme, his eventual downfall and becoming Vader, but then after decades returning to the light and bringing balance to the Force. Luke saw his father's life and wanted to make it better, to make the galaxy better, one where everyone was happy and everything was peaceful. And Luke realized that in this place, he could achieve that notion. He had been training to learn a certain Force ability that would allow him to project his consciousness anywhere in the galaxy, so just like in The Last Jedi, Luke meditated even harder, and instead of a destination, he focused on a point in time, one that he saw, one where he could help his father not fall down the path of the dark side. Anakin was 13 years old. He had recently become Obi-Wan's Padawan, and his life as a Jedi was difficult. The other kids his age made fun of him, and he didn't have many friends, but there was one person who he thought of as a friend, and that was Palpatine. The Chancellor gave him the idea of leaving the Jedi Order, but he just didn't know. He didn't know what to do. He was confused, and he was all alone. For all he knew, his mother was still a slave back on Tatooine, and here he was struggling as a Jedi. He thought he wanted this, but Anakin was just stuck. The Chosen One sat in his room just thinking about everything and also Padme, but that's when a bright flash engulfed his room and he was blinded by a mysterious light. Anakin's eyes recoiled from the brightness, but once it died down, he opened his eyes and saw someone he had never met before standing in his room. Anakin was confused and jumped for his lightsaber in case this weird man was going to attack him, but Luke put his hands up and told him to calm down, and he wasn't going to hurt him. He was just here to help. Anakin asked, "Who are you?" Luke responded, "I'm a friend who's here to help. You can call me Luke." Anakin felt like this man was telling the truth, so he put down his saber, but as he did so, the young Skywalker couldn't explain it. He felt a connection to this person. Anakin asked why he was here, and Luke told him that he was here to help. Luke told Anakin that he was a Jedi from a different era that made his way here with the help of the Force to guide the Chosen One. It was partially true, but Luke didn't want to reveal more than he needed to. If Anakin discovered a certain fact, the very fabric of time and space could be ripped apart. Luke told Anakin he could help him with his struggles and he would train him to truly become the Chosen One. And for the next 6 years, Anakin trained with Luke, while keeping it hidden from everyone else. Luke had learned much from his time, and he passed down the knowledge he gained from Obi-Wan, Yoda, and old Jedi teachings back onto Anakin. And the Chosen One became much stronger. He wasn't arrogant with his power. Anakin was humbled by Luke, who taught him the true ways of the Jedi and showed that they were not against him. Anakin gained a new perspective, and during this time many noticed the change within him, none more so than Obi-Wan. Anakin and Obi-Wan would always butt heads in the original timeline while still being brothers, but because of Luke's guidance and teachings, Anakin learned to respect his master, the Jedi Council, and everyone above him as a whole. He realized they could show and teach him different aspects of the Force he had never known before. During those 6 years, Anakin learned various things from the history of the Jedi to many Force abilities and the best of lightsaber combat. Anakin learned about the Old Republic era Jedi such as Mitra Surik and Revan, and learned Force abilities like Luke's Force Projection and Plo Koon's Force Judgment. He was much more powerful than in the original timeline. Luke didn't want to mold his father into a weapon for the Jedi, but a Force user that would go on to better the galaxy. Luke couldn't interfere with the direct path the galaxy was headed in, otherwise there would be severe consequences, but he could at least guide someone who could change it. Luke's Force Projection worked in tandem with the world between worlds in a way that allowed him to be present with Anakin for about a week, and then he would skip forward a few months to allow Anakin to take in everything he had taught him during the time they were together. And Luke made sure to tell Anakin that no one else could know of this, as if someone found out it would change everything. But during those 6 years, Anakin Force projected himself to Tatooine and discovered his mother was no longer a slave, and was free, and was married to a man named Klieg Lars. Anakin was happy with this, and the events of Attack of the Clones unfolds. The clone army was discovered, and Anakin and Obi-Wan were tasked with protecting Padme. Anakin and Padme fell in love like normal, but Luke watched seeing the happiness between his father and mother. He wanted to keep that, but there was one thing that he couldn't change. Anakin still had nightmares of his mother, but he knew she was safe. But he still went to check Tatooine as Obi-Wan was taken on Geonosis. Anakin and Padme traveled to Tatooine and met Klieg, Lars, Owen, and Beru. Klieg told Anakin Shmi had been taken by Tusken Raiders, and that night Anakin left to go find her. But just like in the normal timeline, Anakin is too late and holds his mother in his arms as she dies. Luke cursed himself for not seeing this and realized this must have been Palpatine's doing. He couldn't interfere no matter how much he wanted to, or so he thought. Luke felt the rage and sadness from his father and appeared before him, and Anakin yelled, "Where were you? You could have saved her, couldn't you?" Luke looked up, a tear falling down his face as he knew this was the start of his father going down the wrong path. Anakin set his mother aside and grabbed his lightsaber, igniting it, ready to kill every Tusken Raider in that camp. Luke saw this and told Anakin not to go. The Chosen One scoffed at his son, but Luke continued, "My father died in my arms." Anakin stopped when he heard this. My father was a complicated man. He was a hero in his time, but he lost his way. He lost everyone and everything he cared about. Anakin continued to listen. He spent decades going down the wrong path, but in the end, he sacrificed himself for me, and he regained his senses and came back to the light. Luke continued, "I know what loss feels like, but you must not let it consume you. Use it to strengthen your resolve and do not let it happen to anyone else you care about." Anakin deignited his saber and looked at Luke with tears in his eyes. Anakin took Shmi back to the moisture farm and buried her without killing the Tusken Raider camp. Luke nodded to Anakin, but this is where he warned him about the impending threat, that there was a darkness that threatened the entire galaxy and everyone in it, including Anakin and everyone he cared about. Luke disappeared, giving Anakin the knowledge, and Skywalker understood. Anakin and Padme left to go rescue Obi-Wan on Geonosis, and events play out the same, until the confrontation between Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Count Dooku. Anakin's resolve had grown immensely because of his conversation with Luke, and he didn't rush in, instead allowing Obi-Wan to take the lead. Obi-Wan took a defensive stance as Dooku, who was arguably the greatest dueler in the galaxy, unleashed a barrage of attacks on Kenobi. Obi-Wan blocked while Anakin went in for the attack. This went on for several minutes, and Dooku and Obi-Wan were surprised at Anakin's skill. However, Dooku unleashed Force Lightning onto Kenobi and overpowered him, knocking him out. He did the same to Anakin, but Dooku was shocked when Anakin countered it with a bolt of Force Judgment. The two bolts of lightning, one blue and one yellow, collided in a colorful display of power, but Anakin upped the power of his Force Judgment and it overpowered Dooku's lightning. It crashed into the Count, but as it did so, Anakin ran towards him at blinding speeds, kicking the lightsaber out of his hand and caught it and proceeded to cut both of his hands off. Dooku knelt down in absolute shock, realizing he lost as Anakin held both sabers to his neck, but that's when Yoda appeared and told Anakin not to kill Dooku and that it wasn't the Jedi way. Anakin deignited both sabers and Dooku was taken into custody. The Clone Wars would still begin, but without Dooku, Palpatine would have a much harder time of controlling the Separatists, at least for now. Before Dooku was captured, General Grievous had become a cyborg, and after scouring the galaxy for a new apprentice, Palpatine discovered Maul was still alive and took him back as his apprentice. 3 years passed and Palpatine had tried to get closer to Anakin and bring him to the dark side, but it was all for naught as the Chosen One seemed to accept the path of the Jedi. No matter, he thought, the Jedi Order would die and Anakin would join them in death. Anakin and Padme had gotten married and she became pregnant. Anakin happily told Luke, and during this time Luke had become more of like a Force ghost in the aspect of giving advice when needed. He had taught Anakin everything he knew, but he still didn't want to leave his father. He needed to see this through. Luke didn't know how long he had spent in the world between worlds, but it didn't matter now. Dooku had been put on trial and sentenced to life in prison, but Anakin would visit him regularly, which Dooku enjoyed the company of. The Jedi tried to get Dooku to give up the identity of his Sith master, but he wouldn't budge. Dooku thought he wasn't expendable until an attempt was made on his life by a bounty hunter, and he soon realized that he was nothing but a pawn to Palpatine. The next time Anakin came to visit is when Dooku told Anakin that Palpatine was the Sith Lord. He didn't want to believe it, but since training with Luke, he had always felt that something was off about the Chancellor. Anakin was about to inform the council, but that's when a bomb went off inside Dooku's prison cell, killing Dooku instantly and blowing Anakin back and causing the building to crumble from the explosion. Unbeknownst to everyone, Palpatine had put a comm link inside Dooku's cell so that if he ever decided to betray him, he'd die. All Anakin saw was a flash of light. He heard a giant shockwave and felt incredible heat all around him as he was thrown back into the wall with rubble falling on top of him. Palpatine watched the building explode from afar and smiled. He knew Dooku was dead and Anakin was with him, or so he thought. Palpatine then proceeded to execute Order 66, and all across the galaxy the clones began wiping out the Jedi. Palpatine set it up so the rest of the council like Yoda and Obi-Wan would have been off-world, but those that stayed behind in the temple like Mace Windu, Shaak Ti, Kit Fisto, Agen Kolar, CC-10 and others would meet a terrible fate. Windu was the first to feel the disturbance, but soon the rest of them did as well. They stumbled in disbelief at the feeling of hundreds, if not thousands of Jedi across the galaxy being wiped out. But as Mace ran outside, he looked up and saw a beacon of death. 3 Star Destroyers with their cannons pointed directly at the Jedi Temple. He realized it was too late, and the temple and everyone in it would soon be gone. He sighed and accepted this outcome as a rain of hellfire was unleashed, annihilating the Jedi Temple and everyone inside in an instant. Luke felt this and wondered if he made the right choice. Is this what he wanted? All this needless death and destruction? But he appeared to Anakin, who awoke, struggling under the weight of a pillar on top of him. Luke told him he needed to get up now. The galaxy and everyone he cared about was in danger, and if he didn't stop this, everyone would die. Anakin, hearing this, used all of his strength, using the Force to pick up the pillar and other rubble and made his way outside the prison. He looked in the direction of the temple, and all Anakin saw was smoke and flames. He looked in shock as he saw the Star Destroyers in the sky above, and realized what happened. All of this because he was too late. All of this because of Palpatine. He didn't have time for Yoda, Obi-Wan, or anyone else who may have survived or were off-world, but he needed to confront Palpatine himself. Anakin made his way to the Senate building and entered inside Palpatine's office. The Chancellor sensed the Chosen One coming, and he smiled. As Anakin opened the door, Palpatine turned around. "Ah, young Skywalker, welcome." Palpatine smiled. Anakin, gritting his teeth, responded, "I know what you are, and you are hereby under arrest." Palpatine cackled. "It's treason, you know." Anakin's response was igniting his saber, but Palpatine stood up and used the Force to grab his own saber. But he laughed as 4 beings jumped through the window. Darth Maul, Savage Opress, General Grievous, and the Grand Inquisitor. They ignited their sabers and the 5 surrounded Anakin, who looked around as a bead of sweat dropped down his forehead. He was going to die in this fight, but he was going to take all of them down, no matter what. Luke saw this and decided that he didn't care about the consequences, and he stopped the Force projection and fully entered into that timeline and appeared next to Anakin, igniting his own saber. Palpatine and the others were shocked to see a Jedi appear out of thin air, but no matter, they would both die. "I am Luke Skywalker, son of Anakin Skywalker, the Chosen One. We will stop your reign and bring peace and balance to the galaxy." Luke spoke. Palpatine was in shock, but cackled. However, Anakin was even more shocked. He always felt the connection to this man, who he came to call master, but to find out it was his son was another matter entirely. But they didn't have time for that, as the 5 leapt towards them. Palpatine screamed and leapt towards Anakin, and the 2 engaged in a duel. As Anakin took on the Chancellor, Luke took on the other 4. Green and red collided, as did Grievous's blue and green sabers in a colorful illumination on the dark walls. Grievous was the first to run forward, swinging all 4 arms, but Luke parried each one as Grievous attacked. The Grand Inquisitor used a Force push to knock Luke towards Maul, and Savage who engaged in a frontal assault. Savage led the charge and his attacks were heavy and ferocious, but Luke dodged each one and kicked them away. As Maul with his double-bladed lightsaber came swinging in, Luke felt he was the most powerful of the 4, so he would beat him last. Luke cut Maul's saber in half and force pushed him into Savage. The Grand Inquisitor used his unique saber to get the upper hand, but Luke had learned of the Inquisitor lightsabers from Ahsoka and knew how to deal with it. He dodged each strike and was faster than the Grand Inquisitor could keep up with, and before the former Temple Guard could stop him, Luke cut him in half. Grievous lunged forward, but as he did so, Luke impaled him through his vital organs and Grievous coughed. As Luke used the Force to push him outside the window and to toss a thermal detonator the Grand Inquisitor had on him and watched him explode in the air. Maul and Savage got back up and tried to attack Luke, but the son of Anakin Skywalker had enough and unleashed his full power, easily overpowering the two Dathomirian brothers. Luke thrust his green blade forward into Savage's chest and then ripped it out, killing him. And as Maul leapt into the air, Luke, just like Obi-Wan had done at Tatooine to end Maul, took a defensive stance and struck him down as he tried to attack. Anakin was struggling against Palpatine. The Sith Lord had launched himself forward with a menacing scream and had unbelievable speed. Anakin did everything he could, but he was being overpowered. Palpatine unleashed Force Lightning and Anakin responded with Force Judgment, but the Chosen One remembered all the Jedi that had died in the last few hours, and this filled him with a sense of duty to defeat this monster. He was getting stronger, but it still wasn't enough. Luke saw Anakin struggling and joined the fray, helping his father, and together the duo overpowered Palpatine with Luke blocking his crazy fast attacks and Anakin giving the finishing blow, decapitating the Chancellor. The two fell to their knees, tired from that tough battle, and Anakin asked if Luke was alright. But when he looked, he saw Luke disappearing. This was the consequence of interfering directly with the past. He changed events and now he and his timeline were being erased. Anakin ran to Luke, his master, his son, and hugged him, begging him not to leave, but Luke said he was never meant to survive. He knew the risks, but still went through it anyway. And as Anakin had tears in his eyes, Luke said he was proud of the man his father had become, and then vanished from existence. Anakin looked down in sadness, but knew Luke wouldn't want this. After some time, he met up with Obi-Wan and Yoda and explained everything minus his son, and said Palpatine was the Sith Lord, but that he killed him. The Jedi would take this to Bail Organa on Mon Mothma, calling a meeting, and they would show everything Palpatine had done and how he was responsible for the Clone Wars. Time passed and the Republic and Separatists were able to find peace and the war came to an end. Padme would give birth to Luke and Leia, and Anakin would look at his son, knowing the great man he was destined to become. Anakin would leave with Padme and his children to Naboo, where they would raise the two, with Ahsoka moving there as well. Obi-Wan and Yoda would begin the daunting task of rebuilding the Order, but in the wake of the destruction of the Jedi and Sith, a new era was born. One that would be filled with peace and prosperity for generations to come. Alright, so that was the story, and let me know down below what you thought of it. I thought it was pretty good. I mean, it's always kind of hard to figure out like time travel in like a fanfic or what if video. I feel like every other YouTuber does that, is kind of has a hard time with that, but you know, I feel like this works in its own way. But yeah, let me know down below what you thought of it, what other videos you want to see, what is fanfics, reviews, lore, comics, video essays, just anything Star Wars, let me know down below. Donate to the Cash App if you have a video that you want to see. I try and make it into a short or a long form video if I can, if like the idea is good enough. But if you also want to check out my other channels, all that will be linked down below. But with all that out of the way, I will see you all in the next one. Peace.